Today we have Stephan Mantel. He's an agronomist and soil scientist by education. He is an enthusiastic educator and lecturer on the soils of the world. He has more than 20 years of working experience in various countries around the globe, with the focus in Southeast Asia. Most of his work is dedicated to sustainable natural resource management, among with other projects on sustainable forest management in Indonesia and regional to global assessments of land degradation and conservation. Stephan is head of the World Soil Museum and curator of the physical collections. He coordinates and related educational activities. Please join me in welcome him. Also, a quick reminder that the session is being recorded. And if you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And during the end of the presentation, if you feel comfortable enough, please unmute yourself and ask those questions as well. So thank you. So I'll stop sharing now.
Okay, thank you, Valeria. First of all, I thank you for asking me to present, and it's really a pleasure and an honor to present to you today. So let me start by sharing my screen. So I will talk today to you about the role and the value of soil museums in advocacy and education. And of course, I do that from my experience of heading the World Soil Museum. And I'll talk about other education in other museums as well. First, I'll talk a bit about definitions, soil, museums. I'll talk about collections and the importance of collections, and with, of course, a focus on the World Soil Reference Collection as we have them at ISRIC World Soil Information. And then I'll talk about education in soil museums. And of course, I'll put the focus again on our experience in the World Soil Museum with that. So my institute, ISRIC World Soil Information, which is an international foundation concerning the delivery of soil services, so soil information of soils around the world. And the museum is located actually here on Wageningen campus. So Wageningen, the buildings of Wageningen University is what you see in a landscape of ice-pushed ridges and Pleistocene sands. That's where we are. And let's talk about soil first and definitions, because soil, if we talk about soil advocacy and education, on the one hand, soil is a subject that's easily talked about because it relates to many things, if not all, in our life. But at the same time, it's a resource that is difficult to grasp for many people that are not working on a daily basis with soil. So we look at soil as we see it in the picture here. So the very upper part of the soil, where we walk on, we live on, we build on, we travel over, and we grow our crops on. But if we could look into the soil, and of course we can, if we dig a hole or dig a ditch, then we see that soil is variable with depth. And many people don't realize that. So laymen don't often realize that soil has horizonation and is variable with depth. And we see that variability, as we see it here in the picture, also differs over fields and over the surface. So this black organic top layer is thicker in one place than another, and that relates to functions of soil. And farmers know that, of course, because some parts of the field are dry and other parts are wet. So they include that in that knowledge in their management, of course. And soils also vary over the planet. So soil variability between fields. This image is from the central plain in Spain near Madrid. And we see that soils actually, even within fields here, we see color differences, and those color differences are explained by mineralogy and organic carbon and properties of soil that also have a function in terms of land management and other practices. So soils vary with depth and over the surface of the earth, but also soils continue to change over time under the influence of the soil forming factors. So that makes soil as a natural resource a bit complex to explain to students, but also to laymen as a subject for education. Now let's have a look to a bit more of the variation of soils. Soils are extremely variable, and there are many many types of soils around, over the world, depending on how you group them, how you look at them. But here we see a beautiful soil that I took a picture of in Mongolia, soil with a high organic carbon top, so a molic epipattern. In US terms, it would be a mollisol, and in WB terms, I think it's a phaeozem or a chernozem. And a very contrasting soil, a soil that we have around our area here in the Netherlands, in Wageningen, is a soil from the heathlands, sandy soil, a potsol or a spodosol, with, yeah, it's a kind of archetype of soil with these beautiful horizonation and beautiful colors. Here we see a soil from Latvia. It was a picture I made in the WRB tour, so a soil classification field conference, and well, again, spectacular color differences within the profile. And this is a planosol, so a soil with abrupt textural difference. And I think in soil taxonomy it would be alphisol, because it has also clay movement in the profile. Then you see unexpected things sometimes in the field, but also soil certainly have aesthetic value. And here we see a soil also from Mongolia, where you see these beautiful patterns as if it was painted by Van Gogh. And this is actually salt that travels upward in the profile under the influence of thawing, where water moves upward and takes salts upward in the profile. Another beautiful soil picture to look at is a soil that we sampled in the foot slopes of the mountains between Spain and France, the Pyrenees. And there you see color differences in soil, like green and red and white, that are caused actually by the parent material, the clay stone, on which this soil is forming. So soils are quite variable. They present much different properties in different places. And that's something we use for education and try to explain in research, of course, as well. But let's go back to another definition, because I'll be talking about education and advocacy in soil museums. So what is a museum? Because people often have different perception of what is a museum and what are the functions of a museum. And if we take the definition of the International Council of Museums, then we consider a museum as a non-profit, permanent institution in the service of society and its development, which is open to the public, which acquires, conserves, researches, communicates, and exhibits the tangible and intangible heritage of humanity and its environment for the purposes of education, study, and enjoyment. So there are many different functions that are combined into a museum. Mostly the public visiting a museum sees the exhibits of a selection of the collection, but ultimately a museum is much more than that. It manages a large collection on which it does research, and also, of course, conserves and manages a collection. And then the exhibit also has different functions like education, study, and also edutainment, so enjoyment. Now, many museums are active also in involving young people, attracting young people to see the exhibit and to learn of the collection. And here you see a young person looking at a set of paintings. And the question is often, how do we introduce children to the exhibits in museums, or how do we introduce art to your kids? And this person is actually also looking at a painting which often contains also soil material, because ochre, one of the major components of soil paints, is a derivative of soil. But we rarely see soil in museums. So we could also ask, how do we introduce soil to kids? And soil is rarely presented in museums, not even in natural history museums. And that is something to think about, because if we think soil is an important natural resource that needs to be conserved, cared for, managed well, then of course it also needs to be taught and spoken about to the general public, but also to students, so that if we don't realize what soil is, then how can we properly take care of soils and care for soils? Now, the other question is, why do we collect? The collections are the basis for museums, and here we see a spectacular collection of birds and bird species. And collections are, of course, we as humans observe our environment that we live in and that we are part of, and collections are a way to document our environment and to study it, and to also have a reference for the objects that we study. So, for instance, bird species may go extinct, and then we still have species in the collection, so that we can still study the extinct species, or for instance, we see differences in species, and then we refer to the collection to study the differences and try to make hypotheses of why we find certain differences or properties or other parts of the collection that we can study. Now, we do that, we document the environment around us, not only birds, but also butterflies and other things that we can observe and collect. So marine life, shells, and other species that live in water, rocks and minerals, that all are described, documented, filed, but also used to develop a taxonomy on. So to decide what collection pieces belong together, what we can observe in the field and have in the collection, or what should we separate from each other. So taxonomic systems. And that's the same, of course, for the plant world, where we collect plant specimens, flowering, leaves, and then decide and study that to decide also on taxonomy and the properties of plants. Now, do we have that for soils? Well, unfortunately, not so much, but they do exist. We study mostly soils in the field, like you see here in this picture of one of the classification tours organized by the ISRIC in South Africa. And then you have many people together studying the same soil in the field, which is valuable because eyes and different minds look differently at the soil. And then by studying it together and having discussions on that, we can agree on certain properties that can be observed or cannot be observed, and why we see what we see, and what were the assumed processes that have led to the properties that we can observe in the field. But collections are also have a role in that, because a field survey is a one-time moment where we have the opportunity to be in a soil pit, but collections of soil allow us to go back to that place, for that site, by the samples that we have taken. And in the World Soil Museum, in ISRIC World Soil Information, we have a large collection that was built up over 55 years of about 1,200 sites in about 85 countries, where we've sampled columns of soil that were prepared with lacquer so that we can display them on the wall in the museum. But for every of those sites, we've also sampled the genetic layers, the horizons of soil, and which are kept for reference, for future analysis, but also have been analyzed for chemical physical properties. So we have the samples have known properties, which are documented in databases. And here you see an example of the pots that we conserve the samples in, from different profiles and different horizons and different countries. So why do we have soil collections? We document the environment through physical samples, describe and analyze them, and that is vital for understanding soils, their properties and their functions, and it provides clues about formation, genesis, variation of soil, and the human influence on soil. It's a baseline against which new observations can be compared, so samples from different time periods at a specific moment in time, and we can use it to produce and test predictive models. So for instance, the impact of land management on erosion, for instance, acid rain, impact of pollution, or climate change. By safeguarding reference profiles, we provide a basis for classification, so taxonomy. And every soil monolith and associated samples with good data provides a physical snapshot of a soil at a particular point in time and space. So physical specimens provide a wealth of expected and unexpected information, and performing new analysis or testing hypothesis can be done on physical sample and not from a description alone or a photograph. So to give an example, after the disaster in Chernobyl, radioactive material was spread through the atmosphere and was deposited in different parts of the world. And then people were taking samples, but wanted to have samples from before Chernobyl to compare with. And they turned to us, for instance, for providing some sampling material from pre-Chernobyl conditions. And that was luckily possible. So also for future research, soil collections have a relevance. Now, the basis of our institute and the start of our collection and the museum was actually in the 1960s, when there was a concern. In the 1960s, there was a debate and a concern about the growing world population and the food security situation related to the growing world population. So the question was, can we feed the growing world population? And that question, although it has been studied a lot, is still relevant today, especially since we have climate change into play today. So that changes the conditions and the security of weather and crop production. So to answer that question, scientists worldwide thought about this question, but also identified that there was a need for a world soil map. So a global map that presented the soil properties over the world in a bird's eye view, and that map didn't exist. So even though it was a time of political divide, it was the time of the Cold War, 133 institutes worldwide worked together to arrive at an agreed common legend, so one common name giving for the major soil types of the world, and to produce together this world soil map coordinated by FAO. And in that process, you have to think that in the 1960s, we didn't have computers as we have them now. So all the results of soil survey were produced in paper, so expensive undertakings, in paper, in reports and maps. And a huge amount of information was compiled in that process of producing the world soil map. That was a project that took 20 years, by the way. And the scientists thought we need a place where we can safeguard this information for future generations. And that was the start of ISRIC, in fact, and the World Soil Museum. And they wanted also to have a place where reference information was stored, reference soil information, so the reference soil collection, and a place where you could see good examples of the legend of the soil map of the world. So real soil profiles that could be shown that were an example of the soil map of the world. So that's the start of the World Soil Reference Collection. So by now we have more than 1,000 undisturbed soil profiles from about 85 countries with accompanying information, which is disclosed through online databases. And we have and they were an illustration of that same soil map. We have about 7,000 pots on the shelves that we provide sampling material to parties, scientists that request it for research that adds to the current state of knowledge. We have thin sections of soils, so to study processes in soils. And we have many slides that was before digital photography. They have all been scanned by now, and photographs from the sites that we sampled soil from. So that slides from landscapes, land use, and of course soil pits and soils. And we have partial collections, special collections that, for instance, the Glinka Memorial Collection that shows soils from the former USSR collected during the 1920s. We've built on that collection with local partners in partner countries, and because they know the soils of their country, of course, best, and they would help us to find specific soils in their countries. And in that process, we have, in that collaborative process, those partners also were trained to establish national collections. So we would always take multiple soil profiles from the sites that we visited. And in many cases, they developed their own national reference collection and established a local soil exposition that in many cases developed into a soil museum, like Taiwan, in Thailand, in Colombia, and Brazil, where you have now good, well-developed soil expositions, soil museums. For example, here is an exposition in Cuba that is curated by the Sugarcane Institute, and that continues to work on a collection of soils for education and advocacy and research. And they have a national collection for the major soils that occur, that are found in Cuba. And here you see a display in the Cuban Soil Museum with information next to the soil profiles as displayed in the museum in Havana. Recently, we have put together a paper. I contributed to a paper that was initiated by Anne-Richard de Forge, where an inventory was made of where in the world we actually can find soil museums and soil expositions that are accessible to the public. And well, if you compare it with museums of other types, like art museums, it's very modest. We have 38 soil museums in the world, 34 permanent soil expositions, and then there are collections accessible by appointment in different countries. So if you look at the black dots on this map, you see the soil museums where you can find them, and the white spots are exhibitions that are accessible in universities or in soil institutes, either open or by appointment. Now here you see a photographic impression of a very few of those that I collected from the internet. So in Dubai, you have a very new museum, and so some of them are very recent. In China, for instance, you have a development of various expositions and museums, and they rapidly develop their own collection from their region and even a national scale. In the US, you have various soil expositions as well, mostly related to universities. And St. Petersburg is probably the oldest soil museum in the world. It's Vasily Dokuchayev Central Museum of Soil in St. Petersburg. So there's a variety of soil museums which all have their own approach, but mostly the core of these museums are soil monoliths, so soil profiles taken from the field and then treated with lacquer so they can be presented over time in museums with all the important properties they have: roots, pores, structure, color, etc., which is important for education, of course. So these reference collections, they have a role for the international soil science community in developing classification systems for definition and verification of criteria. Sorry. And they are a basis for research, which I mentioned already before, and a unique source for education in soil museums and for advocacy. Now let's talk about education. I've first discussed the soil collections, which is the primary source for education in museums. Let's have a look at education. And let me start with the World Soil Museum as we have it here in Wageningen. And you see that this is the outer view of the World Soil Museum, which is a heap of soil taken with a spade from the ground and put above the ground. And you see the outer lining of the museum, the walls, they represent soil horizonation, so color differentiation with depth. And on the left side, that red building, on the ground floor, these are where we have the offices of ISRIC, which is part of a larger complex of the Environmental Sciences Group of Laki University. Excuse me. So let's have a look inside the Soil Museum. So we have theme stations in the Soil Museum, we have video displays and also map table and theme stations explaining soils and the role in society. And of course, our core collection, the monoliths that you see on the wall in different segments. We have a soil and climate wall, we have soil and parent materials, so that's organized by the soil forming factors. That's the storyline of the museum. And the panels below the soils explain the soils of that section. And close to the profile, there's a QR code where you can read off with your phone and access the information and database of that soil. And we have also audio tours, so people can also be self-guided in the museum. And here's another impression of the museum. So many different soils from many different places. And a map table which allows you to explore soil spatial distribution of soils in the world, and which features also our soil grid system, the global soil information system at a 250 by 250 meter resolution, soilgrids.org. So who do we teach in the Soil Museum? We have scientists and visitors passing by and visiting the museum, but our core groups are students from universities, Wageningen University, and also other Dutch universities. But our core groups are actually universities that surround the Dutch universities in Belgium, United Kingdom, and many universities from Germany. They visit the museum once or even multiple times a year, and mostly in the framework of field excursions they do, and then make the visit to the museum part of that. We also have secondary students from secondary vocational trainings, secondary schools and primary school students, teachers of those schools, geography teachers, and people with a special interest in soils, from soil science societies, but also service organizations such as Rotary and Probus, and nature study groups, and other general public that come into the museum. And what do we teach then? We teach the diversity of soils at the global level. We teach soil types and their properties, how they are formed, soil classification, primarily to the student groups, the soil science students, and implications for management and use. And we always make the relation to larger societal themes. Now here we see a few impressions of the groups that come into the museum. Here we see children of primary schools. They are wonderful to have on the floor because they are completely open. They are not bothered. They don't have any prejudice. They just are like an empty page in the book, but they have bright minds and they have very good observations, and they come with good questions, and it's really fun to work with. And we often go also to the field next to the museum, where we are also outside, do a physical exercise with augering and look at the soil together, both in the museum and outside the museum. And young people are easy to enthusiate about soil, even though it's a subject that may be new to them, although everybody has experience with soil. So we can easily pull them into the subject of soils, and they come with questions and suggestions. And of course, having the audiovisual material, like the big iPad, I call it, in the museum, and they find their own way very well in finding information on those tools. So we have young people in the museum to all older people in the museum, and with the same level of interest and enthusiasm. And one of the ways that we try to enthusiast people is by storytelling. So storytelling is about connecting to other people and helping people to see what you see. And that's exactly what we want. We, as soil scientists, we look at soil and immediately interpret that in terms of jargon and concepts that we have been taught or have developed. But people that see soil for the first time or are more distant to soil, they have to be helped to see what we see. And that is exactly what we do. We do storytelling and then explain soil, not by starting with difficult scientific jargon, but we tell it from from subjects that are attractive, inspiring, and then ultimately talking about a soil, but talking about the history of that soil in terms of land management, impact by man, history of society. By discussing that, we are talking about that soil and features that you can see on that soil. And in that way, people are exposed to soil as a natural resource and its place in the environment and society. So students also do self or let's say exercises by which they work in groups and do it independently, and that goes for actually for all ages. They can do assignments and do observations and explain that to each other, and that's actually wonderful to do. Of course, the younger students are, the more they use their senses. They want to feel, smell, even taste if they can, and explore actually soil in a way that they like. And many of the profiles are, well, not allowed to touch, as is often the case with museum objects, but we have a few things that as we say, are forbidden not to touch, like stones and other specimens of soil material that we bring into the museum. Of course, being outside is wonderful, because then we can feel the live soil in the field. We also receive representative groups in the museum, like politicians or diplomats. And here, for instance, in the picture, we see the ambassador from the US to the Netherlands from a few years ago, I think before, not before this one, but even before the previous one, Mr. Hoekstra. And then we discuss research done on the Wageningen campus, but also relating it to the topic of soil, which is very easy because soil is related to so many other topics. And I believe every soil has a story. So let me give you one example of a soil story that we tell in the museum. This is a soil from Iceland. If you look on the right, and on the left is the landscape that we sampled it from. So the soil is in a lower landscape position where water accumulates and peat forms. But in the peat profile, we see whitish layers, especially in the subsoil. This white layer is from the Hekla volcano. Iceland is one open geological museum. It's a volcanic island with many active volcanoes. And this specific layer that we see, you find in most places in Iceland. If you dig a profile or you dig a hole, you find this layer represented. And it's from the Hekla volcano. The Hekla is a very active big volcano that erupts every about 600 years. And this specific layer is from a big eruption from about 2,800 years ago. Now we see more layering in this profile. If you look at this, these layers at about 50 centimeter, we see this is also an accumulation of volcanic ashes, but that is from another volcano, from the Laki volcano that erupted, had a very big eruption in 1783. Laki is a range of cones of volcano that is actually a fissure in the earth crust, a break in the earth crust of about 25 kilometers long. So it's an enormous volcano, and that erupted for about 8 months in 1783, bringing an enormous amount of ash in the atmosphere, and that had a big impact. The Laki volcano was a disaster for Iceland. It disrupted Icelandic society. Half of the livestock died, quarter of the population died because of fluor brought into the atmosphere. For 10 years, the climate was changed over the globe, making the temperatures colder. One of the coldest winters ever recorded in the US was 1784. Because of solar radiation being reflected by the dust in the atmosphere. And there were famines, misharvest due to dust deposited on the crops and lowering of temperature up to the Nile Delta and even in India and Egypt. And there were victims in the UK because of sulfur clouds flowing over the UK. Now, the Laki eruption was 1783, and the temperature changed 10 years for 10 years after that. And they say that the Laki eruption is close to the French Revolution, which was in 1787, 1788, when the storming of the Bastille happened, and people were dissatisfied for a long time. Already there were big differences in society, but over that societal unrest came a period of famine, also caused because of the climate change that was also related to the Laki eruption, and therefore the people say that Laki was one of the sparks for the French Revolution. So there you have a soil profile which shows the evidence of environmental processes, but then with big societal impact. So that's one of the stories that we tell in the museum about soil related to societal issues. Now, we also have a virtual presence of the World Soil Museum, virtual components by which the museum objects can be studied. For instance, with a global map that let me first talk about the Google Indoor Tour that we had. It's temporary offline, but we are developing a new one by which you can walk through the museum and study the museum from a distance. And there are also collection searches by which you can select and study collection by selecting from a country or by soil type from the classification. And here you see a world map that is accessible online, but also in the museum, where you see collection pieces projected exactly on the place where they were sampled. So you can zoom in on that map and look at a specific profile, look at the database, what it says, when was the profile studied, and the primary properties of that soil, and you can click on the satellite image, which is Bing. It's a generally accessible satellite source. And you see that this soil was sampled in 1974. It's a soil in a semi-arid region in Spain, where you see it's all agricultural fields. And you see it is an olive, it was described as a soil sampled in an olive yard, which is plowed to prevent erosion. That was described in 74. And if we look at the current satellite, we actually see the farmer, the neighboring farmer of that field, actually plowing at that moment when the satellite image was made. And we also see that the soil in the field of that monolith has quite dramatic color differences. And that's the result of the damage that the plowing does to the soil. So in one part, a higher part of the terrain, the soil is decapitated, topsoil is moved to the lower parts, and when the soil is darker, you actually see that the crowns of the olive trees are bigger because there's more water, more soil fertility there, and the crowns are much smaller in the lighter places where the subsoil is exposed. So it puts the soil monoliths in the context of the spatial variation of soil, in the context of the landscape, and even in the land management and the vegetation that we can observe on the satellite image. We also do real-time virtual tours, for instance, for a school in Vietnam that requested a virtual tour because they were treating soil in a subject on their science class. And that's also fun to do and quite easy with the tools that we have nowadays. To close with, we have started a global soil museum network where we have collaborated in the past to help universities, institutes to develop their own soil collection and displays of soil in the form of an exhibition or a museum. We develop a network so that we among each other we can exchange tools, methods, ideas, and also create things together, like a common collaborative digital exposition, and develop a platform for museums so that people can know where to find a museum in their area, and also as a source of its own. So this is we discussed this in a presentation on the 5th of December last year, and that that event is still visible on YouTube. So if you look for that Global Soil Museum Network on YouTube, you can find 3 local tours in 3 soil museums and the discussion of this network online. So thank you for listening. There's much more to tell, but I'd like to keep time as I was given by the host. So I'll stop sharing now, and I'll be open for questions or comments.
Thank you for that presentation. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or if you feel comfortable enough to unmute, go ahead.
I'll go ahead. I have a question. This is just an incredible museum. I'd love to visit one day. I was just curious, the monoliths are just so beautifully preserved, just even the structure is so beautifully preserved. What's the secret for building those and maintaining those?
Okay, that's a good question. And because of time, I didn't include it in the presentation, but let me share the screen again, and then I will show you. I tried to do it quickly to show you what the process is of sampling and preservation of the monoliths. So just a moment, I'll see if I can share the screen again. Oops, let me see. Yes, share screen. So we go to the field, we take implements, we are guided by the local host. Sometimes we clean a wall if we're lucky, but in many cases we do what we like best. We dig a hole and then we start describing the soil, which is actually most of the work. Make a proper description of the soil in the field, and then we dig out a column of 25 centimeter width and the depth of the profile, and we push a box that we already take to the field over the column, and that we start cutting the column from the rear side. And then when it's loosened, we put wraps around the column as we go down in the process so it doesn't break. It will stay as one piece undisturbed. And then when we have it loosened on the base, we take it out of the profile, and then we take off the wraps and we cut off the surplus material that sticks above the box. And then we have a profile in the box that we can then send to Wageningen. We close the lid and we take it out of the field and bring it to the river or the road, however we came there, and then we send it to Wageningen. And then here you see that we open the box, we let it air dry, we add a glue. In the past, it was a toxic glue, nitrocellulose lacquer, but and you see cotton material there where there are holes because we don't want the glue to concentrate and give unnatural features. And then we let that harden, and when that's hardened, we glue a plank, a board on that side of the profile. And then when that is hardened, we turn it around and take off the sides of the other part of the box. And then we already have a very nice product, which shows the horizonation. It shows colors, stones, roots, spores, but we lack one thing, which is diagnostic and important in soils for water movement and other properties, it's structure. So we take off half of this material and it will break on the natural aggregates. And then we spray a bit of glue again, and then it's almost finished. We give it a unique number on the board. We tidy up the board a bit. We paint the board, and we submit the samples to the laboratory. And then the profile is ready, and it can be maintained and shown in the profile over time. And then we handle with the samples, which are submitted to the laboratory, and the surplus material is then put into pots. So that is the work that we do on the monoliths. So that was a bit quick, but so that's the process, and actually it's done. So thank you for that question.
We have a few comments in the chat. Fantastic presentation from Matt Streeter. Let's see. Question: what opportunities exist for applying for the Resource of the World Soil Museum for digital education materials, or what sort of applications do you dream of?
Sorry, I don't understand. What applications? What?
So for example, someone who'd want to work in a similar organization, like what would be the steps to moving forward towards that?
You mean ISRIC specifically or in similar organizations?
I think maybe just do with ISRIC right now.
Well, in ISRIC, for instance, it is true that the work has changed over the years. So a large part of I showed you the example of our function as an institute, as a resource for the soil sample, the soil survey materials that were compiled over the years, and as a way of safeguarding data. And in the past, it was much on paper. So we have a paper library that we disclose through digitizing all this material. But of course, we have had the development of computers, digitization, development of geographic information system, remote sensing. And what we are in the process of now, we now translate that function to digitizing information, harmonizing information, because in soil science, we have so many different methodologies, so many protocols for describing soils, and that makes the data are not often intercomparable. So we put an effort in harmonizing data, putting it into one global database so that can be used again for digital soil mapping, which is now a major activity. So much of our staff are actually IT people that have statisticians, and then we have also soil scientists, and so it's a broad flock of people that we have, and having a good base in geography and soil science is a good entry point for the work that we do, in which R programming and other languages are of course also important. Yeah, and we have we often recruit. We are a small organization, only 25 people, so we do a lot of things, but with limited staff. But we do hire regularly new staff because we also attract funding for international projects, and we also have, although it's limited, we have how do you call it, students, places for students so interns, let's say, yeah, who do a PhD or MSc research with us, if it fits the curriculum of our institute. I hope that answers the question.
I think it did. Thank you as well. Another question: how difficult is it to get the soils to import inspections?
Oh, sorry, I was reading and listening at the same time. Can you...
How difficult is it to get the soils through the import inspections?
Yes, that is incredibly difficult sometimes. Sometimes it's just easy. Some countries make no problem exporting material. Some countries make it very difficult to export material, and for good reasons. Sometimes they are afraid of export of DNA, so biological material that is then they have bad experience with companies that claim and make profit of the resource from those countries. But sometimes it's just because they don't know how to deal with it. They have no good protocol. So the profiles that we sampled in 2006 in Russia were there for 10 years. Nobody knew. We were sent from ministry to ministry, from person to person. We hired a company that we paid 6,000 euro, saying, please help us arranging the permit to get the material. We already have the import permit for the EU border, but please help us. After half a year, they said, we don't want your assignment anymore. We don't do it. So here's your money. We don't do it anymore. So then we were left, and ultimately, after 10 years, we got the profiles here, and it was so sometimes it's very difficult, but we have experience and we know how to do it. So, but in some cases it goes fast. In some cases we are just bad luck and it takes a long time. So good question.
Yeah, you have a lot of grateful comments here if you want to take a look at this too. Another question from Dr. Manu: considering the importance of the soil resources, are you helping developing countries to develop their own soil museums?
Yes, we've done that quite. Thank you for that question as well. We've done it quite a lot, and I showed one image, one slide where you saw some of the countries that we've collaborated with. The thing is always that, of course, if you want people to dedicate time and effort and inspiration to such activities, which takes a lot of time and effort and also resources, then you need a project. You need a project because then you can focus on both sides. So we did have a source for funding from our Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the past, but that dried up. But I think now with the new focus and importance attached to soils also in the debate of climate change, I think that maybe that opportunity will come again. And I also feel that soil was a bit out of fashion, but many from the visitors and the people that I get requests from, I feel that there's a lot of requests for this area of work again, because also soils institutes, they want to be more visible to what they do and do more advocacy of soils to their policymakers, but also to the general public. So I think that era will be coming again, and hopefully we will find new ways to help developing of local soil museums. And I think the Global Soil Museum Network will be an excellent platform for that as well, because it's not that the World Soil Museum should help all locations in the world. I think it's excellent if, for instance, the Bangkok Soil Museum will help other institutions in their region to develop. So this should be a thing that, like a snowball, that will run off a hill.
Another question from Dr. Thompson. Are thin sections available for study for all of the patterns collected by the museum?
Yes, that's a good question. Thank you. Because micromorphology is, of course, a field of study that has diminished in terms of the number of people busy with that. And we have thin sections not for all reference soils. We have a large sections of thin section because many institutes did away with their collections. So we also have inherited collections, but of our reference collection, we also have our own proper thin section collection. And what we are trying to do, there's no staff at ISRIC at the moment that is capable of actually studying and using those collections. But what we do is we are in the process of scanning them all. And we even developed an apparatus. We have asked a student in robotica to develop an apparatus where we can put thin sections on an apparatus and we can give someone access through internet and manipulate in the electronic microscope to study a thin section by himself, by him or herself. But we also are making or scanning all the thin sections so that they can be put online and they can be studied in relation to the other data available for those profiles.
All right. Anyone else have any more questions? That's all we had in the chat.
Valerie, I have a question.
Yeah.
Valeria, thank you so much, Mr. Mantel, for this great presentation. My question is regarding that. Are there any endeavors for putting a course material in soil science departments? Because although I studied soil science, I've never been taught how to create a monolith, like the technicalities. I was wondering your ideas on that. Thank you.
Yes, that's a good question. And actually, we have made at the start of our institute, so it's a quite old document, but one of our first technical reports was how to sample soils in the field, how to make photographs of soils in the field, which seems easy, but it's not, because you always have shades and other things. So how to properly make photographs, document soils in the field, but also how to take a monolith and conserve it. But we have changed recently method. We changed from this toxic glue, this nitrocellulose lacquer, to wood glue, which is cheaper, easier to get, and is also safe for the operator. And I'm actually in the process of creating a new document, and that will come soon online. And apart from that, there are also other videos. So I think you'll find on YouTube other videos because people do have slightly different ways of collecting monoliths, but we will also put out a video, hopefully soon, on the practice of sampling and also preparation of soil monoliths. And then, so that's, I think it's trial and error. Actually, taking a monolith is not so difficult. Ultimately, preparing it is neither is, but it's just a matter of practicing and having it a go. But we'll put out materials that will support people to try it out. And a good way is to make a mini monolith first. So just have a small plank and put some material on it and try it with the material before you have a go at the real size of the profile.
if there's any questions left, we are at 5:05. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Bradley, you might have to help me. I know we have Dr. Manu next week presenting, but I'm not too sure of the title of his presentation. So that'll be at the same time, same link.
Right. Excuse me. So thank you, Dr. Mantel. And right, next week will be our last presentation of the semester. We have our own Dr. Manu presenting on drones and electrical connectivity meters as zoning tools for site-specific management of cold, hardy grape and wine quality. So we'll all look forward to that.